In Sudan, an outbreak of violence has killed and injured hundreds of people and could be the start of civil war. It's just one of many conflicts being waged across the globe, from Ethiopia to Myanmar to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Around the world, wars are getting worse. In the mid-1980s, the average ongoing conflict had been raging for about 13 years. By 2021, it was nearly 20. One reason is the erosion of global norms. Take Russia, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, yet it brazenly violated the UN's charter when it invaded Ukraine. In Sudan, hardly anyone has been punished for the mass slaughter and rape of civilians during the country's various wars. But impunity isn't the whole story. Here's why.
You're seeing more and more wars where there's more than one insurgency in the same country. It's roughly tripled since 2000. And the number of civil wars where there's a foreign power meddling has gone up 12-fold since the end of the Cold War to nearly half of them. So all this makes it harder to end the wars, because if you've got multiple armed groups fighting, it's really difficult to come up with a compromise, a peace deal that pleases all of them. And the ones who aren't happy are likely to go back to fighting. With the foreign powers, the problem is that they're not bearing all the costs of what's going on. It's not their cities that are being bombed, so they don't have the same urgent incentive to make peace as more local groups do. And then you're seeing, as America has become completely obsessed with China and Russia, it's retreated from other parts of the world, and medium-sized powers have filled the vacuum. Sudan's a good example. You've seen Egypt getting involved on one side, and the militia boss who's trying to take over the entire country is best mates with Wagner, the Russian mercenary firm. Almost all these civil wars are taking place in countries where, if you're in power, you get to steal a lot of money. So that gives people a motive to rebel. And you're also seeing lots of rebel groups are able to sustain themselves by looting minerals, timber, all kinds of things like that. And the internationalization of organised crime is making it easier for them to launder their profits. A terrible example is the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there are multiple groups fighting. The soldiers on the government side are paid an utter pittance if they're back in the capital, but they can become rich if they go to the front line just by being able to extort money out of people and embezzle supplies. At the same time, rebel groups are able to extort money from miners and loggers and launder their gold out through neighbouring countries, and this makes the war pretty much self-perpetuating. Wars are almost all taking place in hot, poor countries, and when you have droughts or floods or unusually high temperatures, you find that a lot of farmers and herders can no longer make a living on the land they're on, so they move with their cattle to the neighbouring land, and very often they find themselves encroaching on the territory of people from other ethnic groups that may be hostile to them. Climate change is making a difference in lots of parts of the world, from Myanmar to Syria to even Pakistan. But the place where you really see it is in the Sahel. One study in one sub-region of Mali by the International Rescue Committee found no fewer than 70 conflicts had broken out over things like land and grazing. You add that up across a whole region like the Sahel, and it makes it fertile ground for jihadist groups and insurgencies of all sorts. The jihadists say things like, "We'll bring you divine justice," and they make it explicit that they mean you'll get your pasture land back from the other tribe. The rapid spread of jihadist groups across Africa and the Middle East in the past decade or so makes it harder to end wars for a couple of reasons. Their demands are often fantastical and impossible to meet. Their followers are incredibly motivated and fanatical, and the atrocities that they commit, the suicide bombings, make people like UN peacekeepers hunker down inside their bases, and that means it's very difficult for them to win the trust of the locals and ultimately to create peace. Peacemaking is very hard. In the short run, there's a few things that seem to work. You can start talks long before the belligerents say that they're ready to do so. Do them in secret. That's worked in South Africa, Northern Ireland, places like that. Alas, you have to include bad guys in the political settlement as well, because if you don't, they tend to go back to fighting. You can include more women and civil society groups in the peacemaking process. Where that happens, peace tends to last longer. And you can experiment with what works. In Liberia, for example, they found that reforming the police meant that the police didn't bully young men as much, and the young men were less likely to join rebel groups. In the long run, the things that matter most are building institutions that people trust and dealing with climate change. But both those things are going to take decades. In the short run, we're entering an era where in hot, poor countries, life is short and war is long. To read more about why wars are getting longer, please click on the link and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.